And we are live. Here we go. All right. So, welcome everyone to the Reason We Learn live show. I'm going to give it a moment to make sure everything is working and see if we can wait till some people log on before we start talking. I hate for them to miss it.
Yeah, there's always a delay, which
There's
is...
always a little delay. Okay, we got 4 people are here.
Oh,
Say
brilliant.
hello if you are here. That would be great. And are you able to see the comments? I said it so you can.
I can see the comments, yes.
Okay, good. That's helpful because then as we get to a point where we can take questions, you'll be able to see. And I'll take, if you see something you want to answer, let me know. I can put it up on the screen for people to see.
Brilliant.
All right. So for those of you just joining, welcome to the Reason We Learn live show. And I'm here with my guest. Please say your name so I don't mess it up.
Hi, I'm Dannique Blake.
Dannique.
I am the founder of Cultured Insights.
Wonderful. Welcome. And so today we have a wonderful conversation set up for you guys. We're going to talk about Dannique's business in diversity training and how it's different from the status quo, how she's challenging the status quo, and also her vision in general for diversity, equity, inclusion training, and then how in particular this can impact children or, you know, the reasons that you do what you do and so forth. So before we came on, you were talking about that. So can you give us a little background, lead us in?
Yeah, absolutely. So my accent always throws people because, you know, they see a girl from my ethnic background and hear an English tone. So that's where it really starts. So it really starts with people's assumptions about me, and not just the people that are of a different ethnicity to me, but my own people from my own ethnicity, having these assumptions about how I should show up at school, at work, at college, at university, explaining that I was going to have less than because of what I look like, explaining to me and showing me videos of why I should be really upset about historical facts and carry that into my present and talk about this constantly to validate why I might fall behind. So I grew up feeling less than who I am today. I grew up believing that I should wait for a person of your ethnicity to open doors for me. I should wait to be invited to tables and to speak to people, and that followed me throughout my school days, my college days, my days at university. At college in the UK is in between university. It's not the same as in America,
Right.
But throughout that, until I got to midway through my 30s, and that's when I realized I have been showing up as someone less than who I am, and that's why doors weren't really opening for me, and I wasn't able to open my own doors because I was waiting for people to open them for me because of what I had been conditioned to believe.
Right. So it sounds almost like the conditioning that you had created a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy that was, you know, almost itself holding you back. Like we speak
Absolutely.
about systemic racism and people think of systems and they talk of systems and that's something because the system was, let's say, built by years ago, people who were explicitly racist or something, that therefore it's imbued within the system. And when I think of systemic racism, I think of what you just described. So in other words, somebody within a system that you are, you know, required to participate in, let's say like a school, and they are projecting backwards rather than moving forwards and thinking about progress. They're taking this past racism, keeping it alive, nurturing it almost, and saying, continue to believe that this is your reality. And that then becomes your reality because you are living in that headspace and it's not necessarily real, but you don't have any incentive to check it.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is the thing, is it doesn't just affect Black people. It doesn't just affect minorities. This affects every ethnicity, because then if you grow up believing that minorities should be treated special in a special way, or that they are less than, then you start to believe that maybe I have so much more privilege, and I need to have, I need to show up in a particular way, and I need to do things, which also has a traumatic experience on young people, because they're then confused as to, am I allowed to say these things? Am I allowed to behave in this way? Can I talk about things like white privilege in a way that isn't violent? And when we talk about white privilege, it's often used violently. It's often used to induce guilt, to make people feel ashamed about who they are and the walk of life that they came from. And it doesn't actually discuss how people grow into spaces and how we build relationships with people. And that's what's missing for children right now, is especially with the diversity and inclusion that they're showing on the television, is they're not actually talking about how people build relationships or mend relationships. They're talking about how to keep things divided and how to ride on these experiences of historical experiences, as opposed to what's happening today.
And the other thing that I was thinking of, as you were speaking, is that a lot of the people involved and the most vocal, or the most, you use the word violent, and I actually think it's a good word, because when they speak about, white privilege, it's used as a pejorative, almost like a club with which to beat people into submission. And the people who argue this point the most loudly tend to be people I've noticed who don't live in a diverse neighborhood. They don't interact with a diverse array of people. Even when they do, those people are in the same socioeconomic level that they are. So they're not, because there's diversity in just in terms of what you look like and your ethnic background. And then there's also, and religious and all that, but there's also your socioeconomic class. So if every person of color, if you're white, is also upper middle class and also went to your same schools and went to so forth, that you're already referring to that person as like, well, you're white adjacent. They have all these terms that they're depriving that person of. It becomes this very twisted. And then I noticed people who are not having these conversations, who are scratching their heads going, I wasn't aware this was such a dire necessity. They have very diverse lives. They work with people, they go to school with people from different races, and they're caught unawares. Like, I'm not saying it's perfect, but I wasn't aware that I was so racist. Like, they're literally shocked to discover someone telling them how they feel, because they literally don't feel that way. That's not to say they don't have biases. We all do. But what I'm saying is there's the racist, like, you're racist by definition. And
absolutely.
That's where people are saying, but I don't understand, because what about progress? What about everything that we've I'm married to someone Black. I have biracial children, like, there are people I'm encountering who are saying, how can I be racist? I'm married to someone who is a different race. It's so weird.
I think so I think there's something different between racism, which is what workplaces are trying to push onto their employees. This is anti-racism. There's a difference between racism and cultural competency.
Right.
Two different things. Cultural competency are things that are very nuanced. They're things about different ethnicities or groups of people that other people might not know because they haven't experienced this particular culture. So, for example, my background, I am from the UK, but my family are from the Caribbean. So there will be things that potentially, Deborah, you don't know about the Caribbean, which is not that doesn't make you racist. It means that's not where you've resided. You are from the USA. So there are things about cultural competencies that we can talk about, and there'll be different ways that people speak and their mannerisms and their languages, even the difference between the UK and US. I have so many, my business partners are based in the USA, and I say some words that they have absolutely no idea what they mean. So I'll say some very English words that they're like, what does this mean? And it comes up in our sessions where someone will say something and they are words that either I didn't quite understand or they didn't understand. And this is cultural competency. I don't believe that anti-racism belongs in the workplace or at schools, because it's almost telling these people that any little misunderstanding of a difference or a cultural difference is racism, and that it is absolutely not what everything is. And we often get people jumping from, oh, someone misinterpreted a word, to, well, you know, we anti-racism, we need anti-racism, people are being killed and shot, and people who look like this. And and whenever I go back to it, I try to go back to what's happening within their environment. So in the workplace, are you speaking to people? Are you building relationships with people to understand their differences, so people feel more comfortable to ask, I didn't quite understand what you meant by that, can we go back to this? Instead of having those at the forefront of their brains, these big blow up media things that we see and that are being pumped through social media channels and the mainstream media to our young people who are seeing these, especially now as we're definitely in the UK, we're locked in, and young people are watching more television or spending more time on social media, and that's what they're seeing. And I think they need more healing voices, as opposed to reminding them that things can be violent, which which I think is what is more traumatic than actually helping people to build relationships and understand cultural differences.
Mm-hmm. And what I love about what you're saying too is it highlights the role of the individual in this whole process.
Yes.
That because even you, as you described, you know, you come from the UK, but your family comes from the Caribbean. So you have elements of that culture. You have elements of your culture growing up in the UK. And even within that, from where you specifically grew up in the UK, and you become, each individual person becomes sort of a patchwork quilt of different cultures.
Absolutely.
That is unique to you. Okay. And so, and that has more to do with who you are, I personally believe, than some of these other, what they call like intersectionality, whatever.
Yeah.
These become like more avatars of groups than they are individual traits, because how you put it together to be uniquely you, even within your family, may be unique.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? What you decided I like, and I'm going to keep manifesting this element of my culture, might be something different from a sibling or a parent.
Absolutely.
And so what it sounds like you're saying is that when you can encourage individuals in the workplace and training, and probably also in a school setting, to recognize they are individuals, recognize that the person they're talking to is likewise an individual and with differences that you can inquire about, sort of like be self-aware of your own ignorance of other individuals, that you can't see the book by its cover. First and foremost, be self-aware about your own, who you are. Okay.
Yeah.
Not according to what someone else tells you you are, but you know, what matters to me? What am I bringing to the table? You know, all these things. And then you can share that, I would think, right? And start to understand where the other person is coming from.
Absolutely. And it starts with being comfortable and introspective with yourself. So as I said, as I was growing up, even things like my hair, I was always told by people in my family, not outside of it. It was where I was told that my hair needed to look a certain way to be good hair. I was told that by family members, not anyone else. And Deborah, I must tell you, my family are very diverse, and my granddad is. He is French. He's white French, and my grandma is Caribbean, but also Indian. So I have a very diverse family. Mm-hmm. So I have to express that to you first, so I can carry on this conversation. There are so many different ranges and spectrums of skin tone and hair types and hair textures in my family, that people in my family had this ongoing, you have good hair, and categorized us in that way. You have good hair, that person's hair's not nice because we don't really know how to manage it and we don't know how to do this. So we then internally started to have our own insecurities about our hair. And so then when we go into workplaces and there are people who potentially have had the same situation or heard about these situations, then question why our hair looks in a certain way, we then feel too insecure about that to then pick that up as a topic of conversation. We then arrive at this: you're racist because you don't understand my hair, which I often do believe is part of our own misunderstanding about ourselves. Mm-hmm. So, and I think this is what happens with children. They are taught or conditioned to believe something about themselves, because everything we learn comes from, first and foremost, our parents most of the time, or our older guardians, and our older guardians have learned these things and they pass them down. At this point in my life, everything I know, I probably learned from my parents first, and then everything from school and everything. I'm at a point in my life now where I can say, I need to go back and check and reread and make sure what I was taught to believe was accurate and resonates with who I am. I get to do that. I then have a choice as to whether I pass on any traumatic information to my daughter, who is 15 now, or do I sit with her and say, I actually don't know everything. I'm trying to understand and re-educate myself, because I know there are some things that I picked up that weren't quite right and didn't quite resonate with me. Right. Let's do better. And that's where I am. So anyone who sits in a space of, well, colorism is the fault of white people, or racism was built by white people, we just follow those traits. Anyone who sits in that space is willfully telling themselves that I don't want to re-educate myself. I don't want to do that because I want to be able to blame someone else for why this trauma sits with me.
So I wanted to pull this up really quickly. This question: could what you're calling cultural competency also be understood as cultural literacy?
Absolutely. There are so many terms, and honestly, it's my own made up term. So cultural literacy, cultural understanding, all of these stuff. So they're cultural understandings. For example, someone from Alabama has a completely different culture to someone from New York, who grew up in New York, or someone who grew up in Brooklyn. They have a different culture. They have different understandings. They speak differently. So it's all cultural literacy, cultural competency, cultural understandings, cultural differences. It could all be that. And what we want to do is just understand things. So, for example, I live in London, in the UK. We are often called the people who are a bit more assertive, a bit more forthcoming with our words, a bit more upfront. Someone who is from the Midlands may be a little bit more reserved. And we have cultural differences. So when we come into the workplace, there'll be different ways that we manage situations, or different ways we handle it. Even with different personalities, there'll be different people who react and respond in different ways. Some people need more time to process. Some people need more time some people are okay to quickly respond to things. And it's just having those understandings about different cultures and different personalities, different mannerisms, that really is going to help us build a more unified workplace and have less trauma on children. If we walk into, eventually, which I one day hope I can do, walk into a school and help young people to understand more about relationship building, as opposed to, you must have 5 Mexicans in your space to be diverse, for example.
Well, because when they do it that way, again, I think it's so demeaning, because it's taking those individuals and making them caricatures. That you may be Mexican in quotes, but that doesn't mean you fit some type. That it doesn't mean as much as people think it means in and of itself. And so, I don't know that it's particularly valuable. And that kind of brings me to the next question I have for you. Is I noticed that most people, we talked about this in the lead-in, most people think of DEI training, or they hear DEI, oh, the DEI trainer is coming, or we're hiring a diversity expert. And in America right now, people go, yeah. And I'm kidding. But
they do.
there's some consternation there. So how do you define these terms? Because you're still using the same terms.
Absolutely.
So I would love to hear you explain what diversity means to you, what equity means to you, and what inclusion means to you.
Absolutely. So I still use the terms in its pure, rawest dictionary definition way. I don't put any salt and pepper on them. I use them in the purest way. For me, diversity, inclusion, and being equitable in public spaces means having manners and understanding that it takes time to build relationships with people. And also understanding that some people will be violently racist. there are people out there who will be violently racist, and understanding when those are not the people that I can speak to. And I'm pretty certain for you, Deborah, those would not be the people that you would speak to. But
I don't
then
think you can train that out of
you
someone.
cannot you can
If
well,
they're
for those
inclined,
people,
they're going to
yeah,
go that way.
you cannot they cannot unlearn that. That is a form of trauma that needs real clinical therapy. They are not the people we're talking to. For me, we are talking about people in a workplace who are experiencing little things that don't work with who they are, and who don't work with different personalities, and sometimes have misunderstandings because of the cultural differences in a workplace and cultural understanding. We are all opening up the world now. It's becoming very international in companies and within schools. And as I mentioned to you, I went to a Jewish girls' school here in London. So we are mixing so much more. And these cultural differences will maybe make us question whether or not we feel included in a space.
Mm-hmm.
And feeling included in a space just means, are you able to have an open conversation with someone when you feel like a difference comes up? Do you feel like you could have a conversation with someone and it wouldn't become hostile? And that's what we're really trying to do with inclusion and diversity, is having people in a space being able to give suggestions and opinions and thoughts without the room becoming hostile. So we're really trying to harbour psychological safety as opposed to trying to win over racists. We can't win over racists. Racists are unteachable for me. We are just trying to help people have safe conversations about differences.
So I'm trying to think, I'm imagining, I used to work in corporate America for a while, and I'm trying to imagine a scenario. Today people use the term tone policing.
Yes.
Okay, a lot. And so and that often gets translated into a racist act or a microaggression. So first there's the pretend that we all have this mutual understanding of what tone policing is, which we don't. And then
I have no idea what that means.
Right, exactly. And then this idea that if you do what someone calls tone policing, that means you are racist. So an example might be, you're sitting in a boardroom having a meeting with your colleagues about a project, and it's your turn to speak, and you start speaking, and let's say you're very direct.
Yes.
And you just say, well, I think this would be a better idea if we did such and such. And somebody else in the room tells you that, you really ought not be so dismissive of what, they interpret what your directness as dismissiveness of whatever the idea was. And you try to explain that, well, I'm just being very truthful in my feedback. And they say, well, you're being dismissive. And then you later get called into HR and you're told that idea was put forth by someone of color, and you've just been, you were very dismissive of it. Okay. Yeah. And then I might turn around and say, well, now you're tone policing me by telling me that I was dismissive. And again, it becomes this fight, or vice versa. The roles are reversed. Yeah. And it was my idea, and somebody of color says, blah, 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 blah. And then I say, hey, that was very rude. And then you're tone policing me. So this is what you said about manners. I love, because every time I hear these little scenarios, or I see them on social media, or somebody describes it, I think to myself, what you're talking about is just manners. It's just etiquette. You're just talking about wanting to maintain a certain etiquette in a space. And these are things, I used to facilitate meetings when I worked at a company. Yeah. We would set ground rules. We would just set some ground rules at the beginning, because, we're going to hear, each person is going to have their turn to speak. Let's try to keep it very positive. Let's focus on the goal at hand, which is to solve this problem, and so forth. And so we would set some ground rules of etiquette for the meeting. And then in other situations, we would do the opposite. We would say, this is a no holds barred, everything on the table. If your feelings are going to get hurt, don't come to the meeting. But at least people understand what the etiquette of the space.
That you're setting expectations for people. And that's what we want workplaces to do. We don't want workplaces to facilitate conversations around big racist or transphobic or anti-Semitic conversations. These are not conversations that most people in a workplace can facilitate safely. They really cannot facilitate those conversations safely. And we always advise, if those are the conversations you want to facilitate in the workplace, because you want some more education on what those things might be, it's better for a workplace to remove that from the workplace and take it to external counselors and clinical psychologists who can help with that type of trauma. What we help people to do is facilitate, like you say, good manners, set expectations, have clear communication and a clear idea of what company values are and core values are. So if your core values in your company are for people to communicate in a way that people can hear and they need time to process what they're hearing, let's set up all of our meetings in that way. Let's give people time to ask questions prior to the meeting, so we can then go through the questions and then we have an idea of what the tone is of the room. And we're not tone policing people. Thank you so much, Tammy. Thank you for the definition.
I didn't like, and part of why I don't even understand what it means is that I'm racking my brain thinking, what would be an acceptable tone for me as a white person to have somebody in? And I honestly, what
would be my tone to you if I was angry about something and I raised my voice? For us, it would be for both of us to understand what the disagreement was,
right,
or is, and how that really is something that we need to address together and sit through, because there might be boundaries that we might be crossing.
But I guess the way I look at it is, like, if I know you and I respect you and we're colleagues and, and or maybe even friends, what you're going to be able to do as far as talking to me or being angry at me or around me is going to be so much broader.
Yeah.
Because we know each other, we trust each other, irrespective of race. It has nothing to do with race. It's just like, oh, I know you. If you go off and you're like, bitch, like, why did you do this thing? Like, it's not going to be as harsh to me. I'm gonna take it differently than if we just met or we work in different departments. Or something like that. And I would hope it would be the same in reverse. Like, it's no more acceptable for me to talk to you that way. That would be horrible, right? So I guess I don't think of it as a racial thing. Again, I think of it as just what is acceptable in the situation, in this particular scenario, between the people in this relationship, and so on. I guess I can understand how somebody would interpret it as being, tone policing of a racial nature. But again, I think that goes to culture. And the reason I say that is when I was in graduate school and learning and doing my student teaching, I worked in 2 different schools. I worked in a school that was 100% Black in West Philadelphia. And I also worked in a school that was a private school, but it was extremely diverse. It was a Quaker school, and they had a very diverse student body. And I spent about half the year in one and half the year in the other. And when I was in the school in West Philadelphia, I was pulled aside by my master teacher who was working with me, and I was told I was too soft. That the way I was speaking to the students and the way I was trying to get their attention and direct them to do things was, for lack of a better term, too white. And she didn't use those terms, but she said, you really need to understand the culture in which you are operating here. And you are not it's not going to function if you continue to ask them to do things. You need to be much more direct, much clearer. So in that context, she was saying, this is just culturally what I should do to be respected and be heard. Okay. And then conversely, I went to the next school and I was told the exact opposite. So now I've done this for all that, like, you're too harsh. You need to tone it down. And I'm like, okay, I need to understand when I talk, help me, because I'm just me. So I only know how to be me. And now I feel like I'm putting on a mask in both places because someone is telling me I'm to this, I'm to that. And I finally said, can I just not relate to the students individually and see what they need?
Yeah.
Maybe it won't be perfect, but I'll adapt. Like, if I observe the individual student and the student is not responsive to me, I'll alter my tone and change it accordingly. I don't want to just assume a costume and say, like, this is this, because there may be somebody in the room that doesn't respond to that either. So I'd rather, even in a room with 25 people, I think you can still try to be individualistic in how you approach the students. And this was the biggest challenge for me, was I was told, this is the tone. No, this is the tone. No, this is the tone. No, this is the tone. So I got very confused. And I don't know if that's the same thing, but
it's absolutely is the same thing. So we get told here in the UK that there are pockets of different places, even where I live in London. Here you can behave like this. Here you can't behave like this, because here the people are more, well, they always say diverse, but when they say diverse, they just mean there's more black and brown people, and here it's more white, and so you can behave like this here, but when you get here, absolutely not. And that's the conditioning they're giving to people, instead of saying, okay, we understand people are different. The majority of people that we have spoken to would prefer to be treated in this way. So if you find that that's a better way of working with them, maybe find a way that suits and resonates with you to work with people like that.
right.
And having those real conversations. But until you've actually asked people and built a relationship or understood what the needs are of the people in that environment, there's absolutely no way for you to say, well, absolutely, this group wants this, and this is how you should treat this group because of this. And then absolutely, this group wants this, and this is how you should treat this group with this. It's more of we should be encouraging more of a relationship building and understanding how we can transform environments and workplaces where there is some representation, because we do like to feel like we work with people who maybe resonate with who we are as people, not necessarily what we look like, but more about where we grew up. So if I grew up in New York City and someone else grew up in New York City, we kind of have something to talk about, right, and shared experiences. That's great. But if we're the people walking into workplaces and saying, well, you should absolutely have, for example, pronouns, because that's going to make everybody feel comfortable, when we haven't actually had that conversation with everybody in the facility and decided how that would make them feel comfortable, then what we are doing is we're projecting our own biases onto other people, which isn't really the way of creating bias awareness. With just conditioning people to believe something new.
Well, that's what kills me, is I look at some of the trainings and I think to myself, do you realize how biased, and how I use the word bigotry, because I think it applies more than racist, in the sense that if you have a preconceived idea about somebody based on an immutable characteristic, you may not be racist, but you're a bigot. You've decided. You've made a decision. And so I look at some of the, and I'm like, how do you know? You're sitting, like, for example, teacher trainings. There's a big one now where they're training the teachers so the teachers can go in and behave a certain way in the classroom. And the teachers are segregated, first of all. So they're separated from each other. And then they're told, you need to dismantle your privilege. You need to accept the blame and acknowledge out loud that you spirit murder Black children, like that they're guilty of spirit murder. They literally use those words. And there are teachers taking these trainings without complaint. Like, they're not storming out. They're not, they're not pushing back. And what I worry about is that they will then take that, whatever it is, and bring that into the classroom. And visit that upon these young children. And I feel like, first of all, I think that the teacher in that scenario is being verbally abused. Absolutely. And then they're going to take the fruits of that, and put it in, into an environment with young children. And I'm very concerned about that, because, well, first of all, I don't think it works. If the desired outcome is better understanding and, harmony and people moving forward in their lives, isn't that sort of the goal of school? Is like, we want to give you skills and confidence and all the things to move your life in a forward direction. I think it goes the opposite way.
Absolutely. If you're being forced into believing something that you absolutely do not believe, you are not going to educate the people in the way you want to educate them. You are going to feel frustrated that you are being forced to behave in a certain way. So that will translate to those children. And guess what? By default, you will then impact those children negatively. You will absolutely do that. So we have to be careful about what we're indoctrinating not just our teachers with, but the children too. I had an experience with my daughter at her school with a teacher who didn't demonstrate good manners, and she was very violent with her words towards the children, and some of what she said was racist. And those were the conversations I had with the head teacher. The teacher demonstrated actual racism, not just what I perceived to be racist or what the children perceived to be racist. She said some quite violently racist things to the children, and then would carry this out and treat them differently according to their different races. And it was with all races, not just black children or brown children. It was across the board. This teacher was quite hateful.
Wow.
So we had this conversation with the head teacher, and at the time the head teacher said, well, you know, she's the best maths teacher that we have, and they almost let her get away with that behavior. So with my diversity and inclusion training, I often ask the motive of the senior people in the company, what would you like to demonstrate? Would you like to demonstrate unity, or are you happy to just have people who you believe are the best people in the room? And sometimes the people who you believe are the best people in the room also start to develop bad manners.
Right. Yeah.
And if you leave that to fester, then yes, absolutely, that will become insidious in a school environment, especially. And then you will leave the children to build their own narratives about behaviour and what good behaviour looks like, or quote unquote good behaviour that creates good manners with other people. So it's understanding when if someone actually brings a conversation to you, and you know, I'm very self-aware, so I would not bring that to, if I didn't feel that some of the things that this teacher said in particular was questionable, I wouldn't have brought it straight to the head teacher. I would speak to my daughter and help her to do the introspective work. But we did that, and what the teacher was saying was wrong. So it's being able to have the conversation without it becoming violent, and actually posing the questions to people. Do you think this behaviour is appropriate? And if it is, potentially, is this the environment that I want my daughter to be in?
Right.
Because I don't think a lot of people ask that question. Why is it that you want an environment to suit everything about you and validate your feelings and emotions, when you are aware that this environment isn't that environment? What is it that makes you want to sit in that environment and create that environment and not create your own? I mean, I've created my own space and environment. I've had to be uncomfortable in order to get there, but that's what suited me. And I think more people need to think about that. Are you creating an environment that suits and resonates who you are as a person, or are you trying to dismantle an environment that has told you repeatedly, this is not the environment for you?
Yes. And when you think about a school, I talked to so many parents, and when my children were in school, and some questionable things were happening, I tried to speak to the director of the school. I got nowhere. You know, I tried to work my way up the food chain, so to speak.
Yeah.
When I got a meeting with the chairman of the charter board, I tried to invite other parents to come with me. And I found lots of people who agreed with me about what was happening, but they wouldn't go. They said, oh no, I'm afraid of backlash. And my first question was, if you're afraid of your child's school, if you're afraid of the teacher, you sincerely believe that a teacher would be angry and take vengeance on your child, if that is literally altering your behavior, why are you sending your child to this school?
Yeah.
I mean, it was funny to me that as harshly as I was criticizing the school, I still had that hope. I still had that, goodness, that if I went in and explained my position and presented everything, that they would hear sense and say, oh, we didn't think of it that way. Thank you for bringing this to our attention.
Yeah.
People had less hope than I did. And yet I pulled my children out of the school after these situations, and they were keeping them in. That blows my mind. And I see it time and time again, this desire not to offend in one way will allow people, puts people in a position to be offended. I don't like to use that word, but to be treated in a way where their boundaries are violated.
Yeah.
I don't understand it. I don't
It's
know.
it's part of the conditioning. So we often told, and we tell ourselves that if we are not in this environment, then we're not worthy, and then we can't have X, Y, and Z. So backlash really means it's our ego sometimes saying to us, if you say anything, you will lose everything, and then this and this will happen. And we start to build this idea of what will happen. And so there are some people who will avoid saying what they really mean. But what happens with that kind of frustration is it turns into people creating terms like tone policing and all of this wild stuff on the internet, instead of us actually releasing or just venting some of this frustration or questioning, what is it that I'm asking for? What is it that I really want? What do I want for diversity and inclusion? Would I like this situation to be resolved? I understand what I'm seeing on the television, but can I actually look at what's happening in my own micro environment, so in my home or in my workplace or in my school, and really sit down and think about, what am I asking? What is it that I specifically would like to see here? And is it something that can be introduced, or is it something that I need to step away from and find something else that resonates with what I'm asking for?
Right. I mean, I keep seeing, like yesterday I saw on LinkedIn, I think Breonna Brown posted something. She had a podcast, and I didn't listen to the podcast, full disclosure, but the question that she said was staying with her was, what are you prepared to give up to have
Yeah,
a better world? And
yeah,
I'm not sure what she meant, but I'm so knee jerk negative on stuff like that because, and that's my bias. That's my
yeah.
bias talking, because I feel, well, and after this year, I feel like so many people who don't know me, who don't know my family, who don't know,
Yeah,
whatever, they're saying you must give up laundry list of things,
yeah,
because if you don't, you're selfish, racist, a Nazi, a horrible person, whatever. It's like,
yeah,
well, my list of what I think you should part.
yeah,
And if you're resistant to that in any way, shape, or form, it proves my implicit bias about you.
yeah,
And that's okay. But if I say, no, and I actually have reasons, no, you don't, I don't want to hear your reasons. So I find myself reading phrases like, what are you prepared to give up? And I feel
mm.
like that could be interpreted so many different ways.
So many different interpretations, and for me it's about so I don't, when I hear that, I don't outwardly look, I don't ask people to give something up for me to feel comfortable. I inwardly look, what do I need to give up in order to validate myself? In order for me not to feel like someone else needs to validate what I'm feeling
I see what you're
inside.
saying. Yeah.
Yeah, so for me it would be something like, if I felt like I lived in a community that was racist, and knowing that I live in a country where it is mostly free, we're mostly able to move around in a way where it's free, I wouldn't be restricted from anything. If I felt like my entire neighborhood didn't resonate with who I was as a person and what I felt inside, would I give up where I live so I could live somewhere that I felt did resonate with?
Right.
And that, those are questions for me. And I look internally. Do I give up? Am I giving? What if I am I giving up because am I trying to fight this because I'm trying to change everybody around me, or am I staying here because I don't want to change?
Interesting. I really like that, because I actually believe it or not, that if everybody did that, you would make a better world. I mean,
Yeah,
I think sometimes people feel like the making of a better world is a thing where you act upon the world,
yeah,
as opposed to acting within your own life and being responsible for your choices. That's not to mean, it's not a bootstrap argument. I'm not saying, everything that happens to you is your fault. That's not what I'm
yeah.
saying. Where like you just described, I'm
Mm,
making a conscious choice to stay here because fill in the blank, or you know what, I need
yeah,
to move if my values are going to be reflected. And if each person moved with their feet, voted with their feet, so to speak, towards what is good, in,
yeah,
in that that then you would have, things would work better. I mean, I really think
yeah.
it would work better, especially if these things that you move towards are healthy and self-sustaining, for you and your family. And I think about the book that I read on this channel for everyone. It was called Dumbing Us Down by John Taylor Gatto.
Oh yeah.
he had a section in there about the early days of the United States and how it seems very repressive to people now that they would have one community around one church and one around another, but you were always free to leave.
Yeah.
If you didn't like what they were doing, you could go. So if this didn't reflect your values, you would move, in that little town, that church would fail.
Yeah.
It would fail if they were persecuting people, if they were treating people poorly and people got up and left. And I think it's the same with companies. It's the same with schools. It's the same when people are able to exercise their choices. If as you said, if you are otherwise free, legally, like you're legally free, how someone thinks about you, and so it's frustrating, and it can be limiting to a point, but it's not determinative.
It's not what someone thinks about you is never, it's one, it's not your responsibility to worry about what someone else thinks about you. And I'm very much about living in the present. I don't go back to the past and say, oh, if I could only have done, I can't change the past. It happened. I have to live here. The future doesn't belong to me yet. So I have to stay where I am here. And if what I'm doing now, if I went to bed and I had to repeat the day and I don't feel like that day did anything great for me, would I carry on repeating that? Would I carry on doing that?
That's a good point.
And, you know, and that's what I always consider. Today, how do I feel about, how do I feel I am as a person? Do I know enough about myself? Do I know why I feel the way I feel about some things? I often leave some of my sessions very emotional because I'm more sensitive than I'd like to let people believe. But I often leave most of my sessions quite emotional because I care so much about people. But then I have to ask myself, what is that caring? Is that caring really for me? Is it because I want to feel like everyone liked me at the end of the session and not everyone said the thank yous in the way I wanted the thank yous to be said? Or is it because I felt like I didn't contribute something that I know I could have, or that I should have contributed? And I have to ask myself those types of questions before I get upset and say, well, that was a terrible experience because somebody else did this and somebody else made that happen. And in the past, they should know that this happened to me and my ancestors and this and that, in order for us to build for them to treat me and understand my boundaries. So I often, I'm very introspective, and I've always asked myself these questions. And I think you also always have to be aware that you are never, if you don't know who you are and what resonates with you, you will never feel validated by anything anyone does. So even with someone, if someone put all the pronouns in their emails, if someone welcomed you into a workplace with open arms and never said anything quote unquote racist, or never said anything intolerant, or was never what was the word, tone, I can't remember what the word was. If they never did that, even if everyone walked into a space and did all of those things to validate what they thought you felt, you will never feel validated, because you don't actually know what it is that you're looking for. You don't know what your peace looks like.
Right. And I think one of my concerns about the way the status quo trainings function is they use identity markers that are often tied to immutable characteristics or attributes, and also are things that have no individual definition. They're just kind of like they're one thing and it's flat. And so the problem is, if someone ever criticizes that thing, whatever it is, or tries to make a policy that affect or anything, now if that's your identity, as opposed to I like fine wine and my favorite food is barbecue or whatever, I'm a fun-loving person with a great sense of humor. I mean, those things are yours. But if somebody criticizes or wants to change a policy revolving around, let's say we talk about, trans athletes, and says, well, I disagree that they should participate in women's sports or something, that is going to feel more like they're attacking you as a person.
Yes.
As opposed to talking about the issue.
About the actual circumstances around it, taking
Right.
the emotion. But this is what we need. It's like emotional harvesting, isn't it? It's like they need that energy for people to feel, for it to make sense. So they garner all of these stories about that drain people's emotions, that bring people's emotional state to the forefront of their brain instead
when
of.
you say stories like journalism and stuff, or
Absolutely. So
yeah.
even in the even in schools, or how diversity and inclusion trainers may speak. So this is why I stay away from the anti-racism and stuff, because it garners emotional responses. It's emotional and reactionary. Whereas if we take the facts and the statistics and the information that we're getting, and we talk about them in terms of, this is what bias looks like, these are the facts, how would you place these things? We're then helping people to critically think about things a little bit more.
Critically think. You mean use reason?
To be a little bit more reasonable. And these are the things. So my daughter at the moment, she does sociology and religious studies. And what they often do is they'll take scenarios, and they'll remove the names of people, and they'll say, tell me what your thoughts are about this. So there was one where they spoke about terrorism, and they gave a scenario, and I'm like, tell us whether you believe this is terrorism or not terrorism. So they all voted, and most of them said, yeah, this is terrorism. We believe that this person should be punished, and blah, 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 blah. And then they gave the name of the person, and it was Nelson Mandela. And everyone was like, no, we don't want to. And that's how they get them to critically think. So they take the emotion out of it, and they just give them the facts. And then they get to decide, do you determine? So, I think if we're able, and that's how I deliver my training, I take the emotion out of it, which often confuses people, because it's usually the emotion that people respond to as opposed to the actual facts. And we would then critically think, and then we would all, I believe that more people would be aligned with things if the emotion was taken away from it first. Let people validate your emotions separately. This is it. But when we come back into the room, we're now going to remove that part so we can get to a joint, almost agreeable state.
And that we're doing it the exact opposite right now.
Yeah.
In many classrooms in America, we're injecting emotion. We're saying, that's what the critical race theory part does, is it says it's racial essentialism, every discrepancy, every disparity. And if there's anything you can't explain through any other means, it's also racism. So then we're seeing a focus on who said something is more important than what they said.
Absolutely.
So if I've done this before, where I've quoted, for example, I've read a quote about the individual being selfish.
Yeah.
We need to do away with individualism because it's selfish in the society. And I've read that to people, and they've said, yeah, that sounds about right. And I'll say, well, that was Adolf Hitler. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And they're kind of like, oh my God,
Yeah.
And it sort of proves two things. One is that they thought the idea of being anti-individual was okay until it was Hitler's idea.
Yeah.
But then if I turn around and I read something that's very pro-civil rights, and it comes from, let's say, a Republican, okay?
Yeah.
Then as soon as they find out it was a Republican, they'll say, no, that's terrible. So, you know what I mean? We've got to, I think, getting the emotion out of it would be a good start. But I think every word that we're using, diversity is turning around to be the opposite.
Yeah.
Equity is turning into, I need to chop you off at the knees so someone else can be taller.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then inclusion is becoming exclusive.
Yeah.
You need to be included from spaces.
Yeah. Inclusion, like I said, I use it in its purest form, is to help people to feel safe in a room together with someone who thinks differently. I feel like that is inclusion. At the moment, I think the words are being used to garner some sort of emotional reaction. So that's why the words are changing, and people are walking into spaces with their own traumatic experience and telling people that you should acknowledge and validate my trauma because this is what has happened to me. And then finding this collective voice amongst people. And when we all go back to our space, and I'll be completely transparent with you, a lot of the Black community or the Black culture have such there's such a trauma in that culture, in different ways of culture, different cultures and different beliefs and different forms of conditioning, that we don't even know whether this trauma came from our own ethnicity or others' ethnicities, and we focus it on one group because we see them as the person who inflicted this pain on us, because that's the narrative we've been told. That's the emotion. That's where the emotion is coming from.
What do you think could turn it around? So I know, I mean, you're working in your way to, challenge the status quo through a different model, and you're doing it sort of, one client at a time, and in office space.
Yeah.
And so forth. But from a cultural standpoint, I mean, what advice do you have for people who might be facing one of these trainings, and their employer says show up, and this is the room for the white people, and this is the room for the brown people, and what if it's too late for them to recommend you or someone like you, right? Then how do they get through it? And I mean, it seems to me like their workplace is going to be a very hostile place after that.
Absolutely. And I think, it's up to the workplace. And if the workplace has started to create a hostile environment, then that's the environment that they want to create. But I would recommend that people walk into those sessions with questions. Have questions, and always practice good manners, as we say. But prior to those sessions, look at what the definition of diversity means. Look at what the definitions of inclusion means, and ask and push back slightly and ask those questions. Ask people if this is what the definition is. Are we demonstrating this during this presentation? Are we demonstrating it in this session? And ask those really tricky questions. And if people say things like, well, diversity of thought and diversity of metrics and all of these things, let's ask them, once we get to this space where we have the goal, what's the goal? What are the goal metrics here? And once we get there, what is the goal then? What are we trying to achieve? What is it that you want? And just ask questions. I think people are less willing to ask questions because they feel like it's unsafe to do so. But I think it's in that questioning where we are practicing good manners ourselves, when we are really critically thinking ourselves, because I think that's the space we as adults we have to get to, where we start to think about how we have to critically think for ourselves and ask questions and push back and read as much literature as we can, the good and the bad, just to get enough information, and then we can push back with these questions, because otherwise we're going to have these lunatics walk into our workplace and tell us that I am the cultural gatekeeper of all the Black people because I'm not practicing diversity and inclusion in a way that they do, and I'm not responding to their trauma, and I'm not responding to the way they're behaving. And you, Deborah, you are the microaggressor, oppressor, holding everybody back. And if we don't have enough information and intelligence and education on how we can answer these questions and remain integral to who we are and practice what we preach, then we're doing just the same disservice as the other people.
Yeah, I mean, what would you say to people who are the purveyors of this right now? I mean, thinking about like Robin DiAngelo and Ibram X. Kendi. I mean, I know that some people have tried to debate them. They've said, they've offered in any space of your choosing, let's have a debate, let's have an open conversation about it. Yeah. Which I really was hoping that Kendi would take Coleman Hughes up on that offer, because I think people need to hear these ideas bounce off each other. Like that's a healthy debate. We need to have that, and he wouldn't do it. And it's really unfortunate because it's becoming literally unhealthy to ask these questions. You are basically drawing a line in the sand when you ask these, no matter how politely you do.
Yeah.
You're saying, I don't just blindly accept this. and you're ruling yourself out for jobs, you're ruling yourself out for friends. There are people who have lost friends. It's
Yeah.
of all ages, of all ages.
Yeah.
And I just don't, you know, I just wonder what sort of one practitioner in the field to another, like what would you say to them if you had the opportunity to talk to them about their work?
I just don't speak to them, is the truth. I think if some people are permanently set in their trauma, and they have to take that journey in the same way I did. You know, Deborah, we spoke about where I came from. So I did come from a very far left way of thinking. That was the journey I had to take. And there would have been absolutely no one who would have been able to talk me out of that, because that was my conditioning. And I had to go through certain experiences and certain cycles to get to the place where I really understood that what I believed and how I'd been conditioned wasn't useful to my development. And so ultimately I do try to avoid conversations with people, because there are just people who want to who are on this journey of that.
And I wouldn't suggest that you should. It was kind of more hypothetical. And it's interesting that you say that, because I think the problem is if you take somebody who's in the middle of that and validate and reward them with millions and millions of dollars, the your perception isn't I need to get right with myself or I need to continue on in my journey. Your perception is that it's not even trauma. That it works for you, you know? And I mean, I'm not going, I don't want to accuse anyone outright of doing it intentionally, but it would almost be human nature at that point. If somebody latches on to your point of view and pays you a lot of money.
There are grifters. There are grifters. And, you know, in the world we live in, there are a mixture of all sorts of people. And for me, I understand, I will have the conversation, but I know where my boundaries are. And I understand that there will be people who resonate with some messages, and there'll be people who want to question some of the messaging. And that's why I make myself available with the work I do, and I spend so much time in the LinkedIn space, because I know that there'll be people who come out of certain sessions with questions, and I absolutely am the person that they can speak to and sit in a more psychologically safe place and have that question with, to help them build relationships with people, and to understand that it's about cultural competency. You know, if a workplace decides they want to hire that person, the other person, that's on the workplace. But, you know,
I really hope, I mean, I see, listening to you talk and listening to your whole approach, there are so many workplaces I've been in that I think, God, this would have been fantastic training, irrespective of the diversity component in terms of race, just in terms of the getting along with other people and being able to work with other people we're all different. And especially in today's day and age where we're a very mobile population, people are traveling and moving internationally. You have opportunities to work with people who are very different from you, but it also presents you with challenges that are unique, because isn't this awesome 21st century? We can be, whether it's on Zoom or in person, we're working with the whole wide world, and that's great. But it also presents itself with a unique need for somebody like you, I think, to come in and bridge that gap and make sure that people can establish these communication methods and pathways to understanding, and even a process when things aren't going so well. I imagine you also have something for that too, where, you know, to offer to HR if there are disagreements, if there are, you know, accusations, if you will, whatever, what is a protocol to go through? What kind of questions or sessions should you hope for restorative conversations or whatever?
Absolutely. So we definitely, and with my company, we definitely think about how you can be proactive. So it doesn't even get to the point of you having these types of conversations with people. We are so proactive in the relationship building and help and pushing people towards thinking about not only building relationships with people, but who they are as people, which is the really difficult part of the work. That's where that's where myself and my partners do the hardest work. We really sit with people who want to do actual introspective work and learn how they are operating and what changes they need to make to help resonate the message that they're sending out or sharing with people, and then building relationships with people. And we have different ways and different types of relationship building strategies, and that's what we really focus on, because that's where it is. It's understanding people and understanding that there are differences, but those differences don't have to be so volatile and violent, and also acknowledging that we all have been impacted by conditioning in some way or another, and just understanding both sides of that conditioning really helps us to critically think and be able to ask the questions. And I don't like to exert too much energy in spaces where I have to debate with people about that. If I need to, I will. But I like to spend more time with the people who really need someone to talk to, and put a roadmap together on how they can get to a place where they can ask questions without being attacked by other people.
Right. Now, you mentioned your daughter's 15. I have a 15-year-old myself. I also have a 17-year-old and a 12-year-old. And so as a mom, and plus you are a professional in this field. What could you say to parents as far as helping their children do this kind of introspection when they're, just in general, so that you're not leaving it all to the school? So like if they go to school and they're going to get this training, there's no way really around it. But I do think there are things we can do to help our own children to be stronger and deal with this kind of thing. And what do you have?
Absolutely. I think it's always about literature and literacy. So making sure we are encouraging our children to read a diverse range of books, and making sure we're reading those books with our children. And if they have questions, we're able to answer, and also question whether or not our biases are showing up, and have those sorts of conversations with our children, and being okay with it. And things around, sexuality and being as open as we possibly can. And I think that's one thing I was grateful to my parents for, that they were, out of everything that they needed to be honest about, that was the most honest conversations we could have, which was around sexuality, and that they didn't quite understand homosexuality at the time. And then that helps, but they tried to read as much literature about it to understand differences and how that all worked. And that was really humbling, a really humbling experience for me, because then that meant that I was the person that then read the right books and spoke to people and was able to ask the right questions, because my parents were very honest about the fact that they didn't know enough to have a valid opinion on this, but their opinions were based on, whatever the conditioning was. And just to be those types of parents, because sometimes we're, as parents, we just want to do the right thing and follow the rules, and sometimes we have to break the rules a little bit to make sure that we're on the right path with our children, because who knows what the rules are? The rules are whatever resonates with you, as long as you're not doing the universal law breaking. The other rules we make up as parents. So if we are the parents who are very honest with our children and say that there are some things I may have learned, they may have been conditioning, and I'm happy to sit in this with you. If you ever hear anything at school that you don't quite think is right, let's talk about it, and we'll sit in this space, and we'll garner some of our friends. Deborah and I are now friends, so we can have conversations about stuff. Let me speak to Deborah about this. And that's where we need to be with our children.
I think the hardest thing these days for children is to feel like they have personal power to, to ask questions of adults. It seems to come in two forms: either straight up rudeness, kind of challenging, and just like, I reject what you're saying. And then the other side, which is they don't speak up, period. And I think from my experience working in classrooms, I've noticed more of the students don't say anything. They don't say anything to the teachers, kind of like, I don't want my peers to think I'm strange, or I don't want to get in trouble. And then they don't go home and they don't tell the parents. So I think also what you're saying about being proactive and, not necessarily pushing it on them, but just making sure that your children know that you're a source,
Yeah.
you're someone who'll listen, you're someone who will talk to them and be honest with them about, look, this is my bias, or this is where I come from, or how I was raised.
Yeah.
I don't know enough about it, or let's learn about it together. But under no circumstances should someone be telling you who you are,
Yeah.
or telling you how you feel, because these are go beyond, in my opinion, there's sort of politeness and there's abuse. And the line is, someone can be rude and just say, you're a jerk. Okay, that's rude.
Yeah.
And then when they go and say, what you think or what you believe isn't true, isn't real.
Yeah.
Your reality is not real. Let me tell you what you think. Let me tell you what you believe. And if you try to argue with me, that's proof that I'm right.
Yes.
That's a form of psychological abuse. And I think it's so important, because what could be really positive work is being twisted to do this.
To help people, is to make people believe something. Well, gaslighting, isn't it? That's really what it is. And what we really need to do is sit in a space and ask questions about people's experiences, and that's it. And again, I always bring it back to cultural competency. We're asking people about their experience, and then we're sharing a story with them about our experiences and what happened to bring us to this space, and what happened to bring them to this space. And then we talk about the differences in those experiences, and we find a way to sometimes let some things go, and sometimes find a resolution within those differences.
So this is another one. Oftentimes abuse is justified under the guise of politeness or good intentions.
Yes. I mean, I'm the person who I usually most often walk into a space at my own detriment. I walk into the space thinking, I place good intentions on everybody. I say everybody in this space has come into this space with good intentions. Their experiences may differ to mine. So I might hear something that may trigger me, but I have to think that what I heard from that person, as long as it wasn't violent or straight up abuse, or, obvious abuse, what I heard from that person was something that came from their experience and their life that was different to mine. So let's navigate that. What differences were there? This was my experience. Can you tell me your experience? Because the way I heard this sounded like this, but I don't want to make assumptions about what your intentions were. Right. And that's how you have the conversation. So yeah, I do think some people justify abuse through politeness. But again, I think there are all sorts of people and personalities in this world that are not always going to be introspective enough to understand why they are doing that.
And I think too, it's kind of a component of, with gaslighting, the next thing that someone will often say to you is, I'm just trying to help you be a better person. I just care so much. And it pains me to see you so confused.
Yeah.
And so you're like, I'm not confused. You see, there you go. And now you're fragile.
Yeah.
Like, no matter what you say.
It's disappointing. And, I often don't take things like that on board. I often don't take things like when people say, well, I want to hold this person accountable. There's no one really that you can hold accountable. Accountability is something that you have to take yourself. You cannot hold somebody accountable. So if someone's willing to be wrong and strong, that's where they are sitting in. They're in that space for now. And so I always, when people say you need to take accountability for making me feel this way, I often, I will maybe validate the fact that they may have misconstrued my intentions, and that's where it ends.
And the rest is like, you're responsible for your feelings.
You're responsible for your reaction to how you were feeling, and I do apologize. There are some people who don't like saying sorry or apologizing. I am definitely someone who will say sorry, because that's just the person I am, and it has nothing to do with me wanting to silence anybody. It's just who I am. So I will apologize for creating the space that created that ill feeling, but I'm not going to validate anybody's me feeling like I didn't take accountability for their emotions.
Sometimes I just think it's an excuse to bully people. It's like,
Absolutely.
I need to hold you accountable, or you need to be accountable. Now I'm going to give you 75, anger tweets about like why,
Yeah.
I think what I wonder is if so much of this is that we have lost something in general in our culture. When I say our, I mean like Western culture,
Yeah.
just being very broad,
Yeah.
of community and a feeling of belonging.
Mm.
That as we've modernized and as progress has moved along, and we're very mobile, as I said before, and we're technologically based, there are many good things that have come of this. But one of the downsides that we don't talk about enough is the loss of neighborhood, the loss of community, the loss of feeling like, well, I belong where I am. And when I read your blog post and you described growing up and
Yeah.
where you grew up, as I was reading it, I was like, that sounds like fun.
Yeah. Everyone says that.
I could pick up on your description.
Yeah.
Whereas there might be somebody else who would have said, well, I wouldn't have wanted that. You made it sound like you felt very, very at
Yeah.
home,
Yeah.
home. And
Yeah.
the concept of home is more than just, where your parents live or your siblings live. It's feeling comfortable
Same.
in the space
Yeah.
where you are spending as a child, especially as a child. Those years are so crucial. And
Yeah.
so when you don't really have a sense of home, wherever it is, and it doesn't have to be in wealth, okay? It can be
Yeah.
in council housing, but it's where everybody's like, hey, how's it going? Hey, I know
Yeah.
everybody in this
Yeah.
neighborhood, right?
All of the neighbors are inside of your house eating from the same pot of food,
Exactly.
Sometimes that's
When
home.
then you feel like, well, I belong where I am here. Now,
Yeah.
yes, as you mentioned, you moved, when you moved, you went to school and then you grew up, and now you're in places where you didn't feel that same degree of belonging. But when you have that solid foundation as a child, I think even if you kind of struggle to adapt to it as you get to be an
Yeah.
adult, you're still going to get there more likely than if you didn't have that as a child. That
Yeah.
sense, that feeling like, well, somewhere, someplace is home, even if it's in my memory. Okay,
Yeah.
even if it was just where I was a child, you
Yeah.
have that solid thing. And I think a lot of people have. I believe we have a whole generation, maybe more, of people who have not had that,
Absolutely.
and they're sort of don't have. They're floating. It's like they're
Absolutely.
unmoored, and
Yeah.
so you're the need for validation, the need for inclusion in a forceful way. Like, you
Yeah.
will include me, or
You
you
will
will
include
you
me.
will
Yeah.
validate my existence and
Yeah.
celebrate my existence. Don't just say
Yeah.
you're welcome here, but have a
Yeah.
parade in
Yeah.
my honor.
Yeah. Every time, have me on a throne every time I walk into a room,
Right.
because that's how you must greet me, so for me to feel validated and safe in this
It
space.
reflects a kind of insecurity that is as scary as it is heartbreaking, or vice versa.
Mhm.
Because everybody was somebody's baby once. That's how I
Yeah.
look at it.
Yeah.
Everybody was somebody's child or a child. And I just think what happened in their world, or in all of our worlds, where we just lost that feeling of belonging, and now we're trying to like force ourselves into
Yeah.
it, or force people to accept us way beyond saying, I'm not going to get in your way.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
do you and I'll do me, but it's now like, no, that's not good enough.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't know. I'm just kind of riffing here, but I was wondering if you had any thoughts on.
Yeah, no, I think it's also, so for me, I've done so much work on my inner child, my fractured ego, and when we grow up, and like I say, some of us grow up with this idea of what belonging means, because we need to feel like we're validated for what our faces look like, what our hair looks like, how we dressed, where we lived. And so instead of really accepting and celebrating ourselves and where we came from, so I always celebrate the fact that I came from a very poor background, and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed being in that background. I enjoyed my that part of my life, because it helped me to understand differences in people and understand that some of the things I was taught. So I was always taught rich people are terrible people, and you shouldn't like them because they don't share, and all of the rest of it. And then growing up and experiencing people who were from really rich backgrounds, sharing their, being able to go on holidays with some of my friends whose parents were just like, it's on us, don't worry, our daughter just needs some company and we really like you, and inviting me to do that helps me to understand, like, that's not what I was conditioned to believe wasn't entirely true about everybody. There are some selfish people who are poor. There are some selfish people who are rich. There are some selfish people who are black. There are some selfish people who are white, and whatever. And I think my experience, I really enjoyed and appreciated. And I think you're right. There's this breakdown in community because we've given labels to people. We're telling people that in order for you to be someone and to be part of a community, you need to attach this label to you. You need to have this label. You need to have got to this university. You need to have gone to this college. You need to be around this group of people in order to feel validated. And really, the real validation is understanding who you are and understanding that everything is so fluid, and that you change, and the idea of good and bad, your ideas of good and bad changes throughout your entire life. But also understanding that in other people too, is that other people change and other people evolve, and other people will have a journey that doesn't always resonate with yours, but doesn't mean that they don't celebrate what you're going through, and not being so narcissistic in a way. Stop, not be so focused on, I want everything to look how I want it because that's my world. It's a bit idealistic, isn't it? To say everything needs to look exactly how I want it for it to mean unity, when really unity is having all of these beautiful differences, like nature, where everything is so different. There are different animals, there are different trees, there are different flowers in the garden, and they all work in a great way together and do all different types of jobs, but it still looks beautiful.
Yeah. And I think it makes your relationships very brittle if they're predicated on the kinds of common things that are labels.
Yeah.
Because you could change your mind. I mean, we've seen this happen
Absolutely.
in the last year where people change their voting behavior, not so much because they changed their core values. Their core values were the same.
Yeah.
But they, for a variety of reasons, felt like my core values are better reflected here than there. And as reluctant as I am to admit it, I have to go this way rather than that way this time,
Yeah.
And family disowned family, people got divorced, people lost lifelong friends. And to me, that's a symptom of poor relationship formation in the first place.
Absolute.
People out purely based on these superficial characteristics, and they don't really know you because you didn't really know you.
Yeah.
Or if you did, you were hiding who you really were with
who you were. Absolutely. And I so agree. I agree because you were speaking to someone who has probably been 4 different religions and I changed my mind. I grew up Catholic. I was Christian. I went to a Jewish girls' school. I was married to a Muslim, and now I'm somewhere residing in the space of spiritualism, whatever that means. And you can change. My core values have never changed. I've always been the person who appreciates people and appreciates the idea of people development and self-development in order to get to a space of unity, and not inflicting my trauma onto somebody else because I feel like that's how holding them accountable is going to make me feel validated. You can be all of these different things and still have the same values.
Right. And you can tell people like, I'm still me and I haven't changed, but for whatever reason, they can't forgive that one change. And that, like I said, that it's heartbreaking if you're on the receiving side of it. I mean, I've seen my children go through that with friends of theirs. And
absolutely.
And it's very difficult, especially because the teenage mind functions differently than the adult mind. So you can only reason with them so much. But trying to explain, like, no, this isn't you. You did nothing wrong. This is that you were just true to yourself, which is a good thing. And the person you thought was your friend is different than who they purported to be.
Absolutely.
Who you thought they were isn't who they really are, in part because they were masking. They were not showing their true self.
Sure. And the thing I love about the young mind, so until we get to 25, is that it's so irrational, which I think is what we're supposed to be. We're supposed to be irrational, like we don't.
So we should be voting at 16. They're trying to change our voting to 16 right now.
Our minds don't have to be so rational. And I think what I love about young minds is they will have these little fallouts and they will have these disagreements. And next week, it's like nothing happened. And that's normal. And that is the best way. You know, there's no duality and nothing for me is permanent. So if I fall out with someone, I don't think, oh my gosh, that's the end. We're never going to speak again. Because honestly, most of the time, if I fall out with someone, it's because I haven't been disrespectful enough for them to say I never want to speak to them again. It's just because we had a difference of opinion, and they might think that they need to. At the moment, I have a friend who is, you know, pro-vaccine, and I'm not very pro-vaccine, and she doesn't feel she can speak to me about what she's experiencing, and I think that's absolutely fine. I've never been disrespectful, she's never been disrespectful, and at some point we'll come back together, and I may be pro-vaccine next week. You know, these things change. There's no permanency in anything, and that's what I love about the young mind. So if we're trying to corrupt young minds to say this is how you should feel about stuff, it's really damaging to their psyche. Mm-hmm. It's really damaging to who they are, because young people will have moments of momentary madness, and that is absolutely normal. Right. You know, and that's how they become rational adults.
Well, that was you know, the name of my channel and of, you know, my website, whatever. The reason we learn, it's sort of a play on words of, you know, why do we learn? We learn to be able to use reason in appropriate ways. And I would much prefer to see the adults in these kids' lives helping them learn to regulate their emotions, helping them learn to manage their difficult conversations, rather than tell them the boundaries of the conversation. Like, these are the words you will use, and these are the words you will not use, and these words are forbidden, and these words are okay. And every day they're adding new words that are literally forbidden. Like, you may not use these terms, you may not read these books. You know, when you were talking about books, I'm reminded that, you know, just this week they decided to not publish 6 of Dr. Seuss's books. And
I saw that today.
Yeah. And you can't, I went online to try to buy them, and I managed to find a compilation that had a few, but the others that were individual books, like On Beyond Zebra, that one I really like as an alphabet book. And you have to spend hundreds of dollars to find it. It's very difficult. It's very difficult to find. And I feel like the other thing you said about reading with your teenager, they're also limiting the books that they're going to read with kids in school. So things that have been put on the list of you may not read are To Kill a Mockingbird, among others. I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. These books are great literature.
They are so, and that makes me upset because I do love Harper Lee. So that
I love Harper Lee, and this book changed me. Like, you know, they'd say the books you read in childhood, and that book, and I read the book, and then I also watched the movie, and whole Scout's entire being was like my hero. Like, this is who I wanted to be, you know. And when you think about role models, or, you know, I'm not looking at the horrible racist people in the courtroom or whatever. I'm looking at Scout, and I'm thinking this open, friendly, just guileless person. And I thought, you know, that's who you want to be. You want to be the person who looks at the violent racist advancing on the prison, saying, "Hey, Mr. So-and-so, how's your son today?" You know, because what you see in that whole scene is, in the film especially, the personalization disarmed him. When she approached him as an individual and said his name, and he was ready, like, step aside, Atticus, right? And that he was now disarmed, like embarrassed. He became aware of himself as an individual in the mob. And this is such a valuable lesson. And if we could read books like this with children to say, you know, see this example, here they were an angry mob about to do something completely irrational and stupid and mean and cruel. And all it took was the voice of a child to bring them back to earth as a person, to say, this isn't me, I'm out of here. And we cut them off from these experiences, I think, to their detriment and to our peril as a culture.
Absolutely. I think
sad to me.
Censorship for me is terrible. I feel like there needs to be both sides. There needs to be two sides of everything we learn and everything we read. And, you know, it's not because most of us don't want to be indoctrinated. Most of us want to read so we can really critically think, but I think they're between some people feeling like, well, if we don't censor these, it will radicalize people. I think actually having people in your workplace tell you to be less white is actually radicalizing people. It's a form of indoctrination, instead of having people being able to say, well, you know, okay, we'll have the be less white doctor in the room.
It's
Yeah,
I'm actually quite afraid of the pendulum swinging back the other way,
yeah,
and for a host of reasons. One, because I just think all of this is regressive and dangerous,
it
and,
absolutely is.
and also on a personal level, people like me, Jews, tend to get caught in the middle of all that. Like, no matter
Yeah.
which way the pendulum's going, we're like,
Well, my biggest thing is, and I don't want to offend anybody, but my biggest thing has always been, I would love to see in my lifetime a almost resolution between the Israeli and Palestinian
I think
people.
we all
That
would.
that absolutely has always been my thing, and I feel like the way we're going is that we're creating that type of divide in so many different groups of people, that we will end up, instead of seeing a resolution to that big core thing that we can't really even talk about anymore. We're not seeing people as people anymore. We're seeing it as a conflict that is, it's not even about people. Like, there are people being devastated in that conflict that really sits quite difficult. It sits really hard on my chest. But we're creating that divide in so many different groups of people that we will end up having so many of those different types of conflict that we can't talk about, that we can't resolve fairly.
Well, it's a problem of tribalism. You know,
Yeah,
human beings, as we began on this earth, we were tribal people for survival reasons, etc. But as we modernized and became an industrial society, that you don't move forward if you remain in the, because tribalism is essentially irrational. It's, you're
yeah,
attaching to arbitrary status of, you know, like a name or where you live or something. This doesn't have anything to do with who you are. And that conflict, I feel like there were tribal rivalries or, you know, a
yeah,
tribalistic kind of thing, but I see it as an exploitation where you have very
absolutely.
powerful people who are
Yeah,
not party to either side,
yeah,
who've been manipulating for their own gain in the
absolutely,
neighborhood, shall we say. And then
absolutely.
I see the same thing happening in Europe. I see the same thing happening in the United States, all over the West. And I really think it's a conflict right now of Western civilization, that we're in a struggle
Hmm.
with, I don't know, I don't want to put a name to it, I don't know, but
Hmm.
some groups of forces,
Yeah,
whatever,
yeah,
conflicting visions of how to order society, that
absolutely.
we will either get past this and survive, or we won't.
Oh,
And
yeah,
and this is really what is sad to me, because I do believe that Western values, you know,
yeah,
I do think they lifted more people worldwide out of poverty. They gave hope to more people of every race, of every culture, of every religion. That is not to say that, you know, it's the very best of everything, not
yeah,
jingoistic. What I'm saying is
yeah,
that there are elements of it that we might call, you know, core values. These, first of all, I believe belong to everyone. I think they're
yeah.
universal. They are not specific to race. That's why when I hear people say white culture, I cringe, because it has nothing to do with that.
No.
It has nothing to do with that.
It's not about white culture. It's about it's Western culture and our ideals around capitalism that
Yeah.
really create structures that are a bit oppressive. And I think if we really sat down and thought about it as people, most of us, and especially the ones who are social justice warriors, if we were asked, would you give up your capitalistic and materialism, it would probably be a no. So as long as if that's a thing that people who are chanting, validate me, validate my emotions. If we ask them, okay, in order to validate you, we're going to all need to give up these material things. We're going to have to give up capitalism. Would you do that in order to get the justice you want to see? It's likely going to be a no. Very
And
likely going to be a no.
yeah, and it's interesting because you'll see some of them explicitly say, you know, I'm a Marxist and I want a
Yeah,
Marxist society. And yet then you see them having, you know, like all the trappings of, you know, the phones and the cars and the clothes and all this. And I think, you know, I don't think you really understand what that means. Like you keep
yeah,
using that word, but I don't think you understand what it means. And they will advance ideas that are definitely collectivist or Marxist. Racism is a collectivist idea. Not all
absolutely,
not all collectivists are racist, but all racists are collectivists because
absolutely.
it's a collective guilt. And so I think, you know, they don't really understand that when you dismantle the nuclear family, as an example,
Yeah,
you want collective ownership of, you know, the state should own things. You want to say like, well, who are these better angels from whom you will choose your leaders? You know, Plato's not alive to consult anymore.
yeah, and that's it. Or Martin Luther King, you know, Jr. Then
Who are these wonderful angels that will decide what's best for all of us and run it, because it won't run itself? That would be anarchy.
yeah,
And
yeah,
we don't really, I loved what you said about the class your daughter took, where there were, you know, this is what the person did, and, you know, do you think it was terrorism, and then here's who it is. Because I think we need to do more of that kind of teaching in school. Teach the critical thinking of, is it the idea that you like or the person that
yeah,
you like?
yeah,
Do you even
yeah,
understand the idea?
and
So
that's
you're
it.
using words, but do you know what those words translate into action?
Yeah. And I think for me, it's more about creating spaces for that, because I think schools and, you know, these public establishments are being funded by these theories. And I think it's about creating our own private spaces where we encourage people to come and have these critical thinking. And if there were more things like this, because I mean, unfortunately, probably, I don't know if this is realism or idealism, whatever it is. I do believe that the more public places are being funded by people with these ideals and these theories. And of course, if you're being funded financially by these companies or organizations, you're probably going to have to share their ethos.
Yeah, I would say that that's the thing I've been trying to persuade people, is that it's not just commerce. In other words, when you see the news media that are all, you know, saying one message, one narrative, and not really doing journalism, like not
Yeah.
questioning things, that
Mm-hmm.
it's not just because it makes them money. Okay, they're the only game in town as far as big mouthpieces. If they
Yeah,
didn't agree with something, they would still be making money to report something else. Okay,
absolutely.
they are actually in sync with this. They
Yeah,
benefit and they like it. So I have been saying to people, as well as some of my community members in locals and even on my YouTube, that the solutions, if there are any, are local. They're creating these private spaces. They are
yeah,
creating, you know, micro schools to where we can, you know, educate our
absolutely.
children in the values that we cherish and hold dear. And you know, we don't have to participate in this until we have to. I mean, if it gets to a point where they're literally at the door with the
Yeah,
tank, we don't have a choice. But I'm trying to, with my purpose with this channel, is to encourage people to think about what they're doing. Don't just go along to get along. Don't think you have no choice. You always have a choice each minute
yeah,
of every day to disengage from that in your own
absolutely.
life with your own children. If it means that you need to cobble together some kind of community support system to educate at home or in a local small private setting, then that's what it means. But, you know, are there things you can do to push back against the system? Possibly, but only very locally. You're not going to get there through the government
Trying
in
to do the
London,
big
not through Parliament, not
social,
through
yeah,
DC. It's not going to happen. And so, and that's not to be pessimistic, that's being realistic.
yeah, absolutely.
I'm just seeing the writing on the wall, and I think your energy is better served to think about, as
Yeah,
you pointed out, what are my values? What do I want to impart to my children? What do I want in my company? You know, if you run a company or you run a business,
yeah,
don't let the mob steer you. What is going to be
absolutely.
success for me?
Yeah,
And there are options. And that's why I wanted you to come here, because I've been, as I said, I've been critiquing for months. And I've had people say, well, there's got to be a better way. And I'm like, yes, there is. And
Yeah.
so, and I think, so I'm going to say his name wrong. He was coaching me all day today. Elaric Noir.
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
yes, yeah.
So he is our mutual friend on LinkedIn who connected us. And I'm so grateful because this is exactly the conversation I wanted to have so much. I don't know if you're aware, but we, in the United States, there is a bill, at least in New Hampshire, to ban critical race theory in public spaces
Yeah.
where you're using tax dollars to educate and so forth. And all that it really is a reaffirmation of the Civil Rights Act and making it clear that you may not stereotype and segregate to do this training. And it has been wrongly characterized as a banning of diversity training.
Yeah.
And so I was so eager to have somebody, come and chat here that I can then share the replay all over so people can become educated that no, it explicitly says the opposite, that you can and should do diversity.
Real diversity and inclusion training with the right pure words, not indoctrination training.
Yes.
That's what it should be called, indoctrination training.
I like that. That's much more accurate. It's much more accurate. Yes. So I really appreciate this time that you gave to this. I've learned so much. And as I said to you in the beginning too, that when reading about your growing up, even though it's so radically different from my own, it's not comparable in the particulars.
Yeah.
I could feel the way you wrote it. I was like, I could feel, for those of you who don't know, she has a blog piece on her website, which I'll put in the description. I think I already did put in the description section, but about an epiphany of her middle-class upbringing. And I was reading it thinking like, I felt so similar. Like I was like not in the right, not really quite included in the space where I was allowed to be. I seemed to fit superficially, but I didn't.
Yeah.
And it was very awkward and strange. And, it took a lot of getting used to and feeling comfortable with myself to realize that I can pull up to the adult table here.
Yeah, I'm allowed to be at the adult table, and it doesn't matter. And that's the thing. It's when you start to recognize and appreciate everything about who you are, you can pull up to tables and you can remove yourself away from tables that don't resonate with your voice. And I think that's what we're seeing at the moment, is that there are some people who absolutely don't know how to remove themselves from tables because they've been conditioned to believe that if they remove themselves from that table, they will lose everything.
Right. Exactly. Gosh. Well, this has been fabulous. Thank you so, so much. And I think we've answered like the core questions. So when we sign off, I'll meet you back in the broadcast studio real briefly, and then we'll
Thank you. Oh, it's been great. Bye.
Yeah, great.